Okay, welcome to the second half of Unit 5. The first half of Unit 5 focused on the Civil War, and now we are going to focus on the Reconstruction era. Today, we're going to take some time to define what the plans of Reconstruction were and what this time period is really all about. So, what is Reconstruction? Reconstruction is the years following the Civil War. It's what we name that time period where the Confederate States now have to rejoin the Union. While we know that they never really left, they still have to go through this time period of transition. We also know this is a time for a rebuilding of the United States. We're going to have the radical Northerners, a group of radicals in the North, is a better way to put that, trying to punish the former Southern Confederacy for the war. This group will blame the Southern Confederacy for the Civil War. We're also going to have the South on the other side trying to figure out how do we preserve our way of life without slavery. There's a few questions that we have to answer when it comes to making a plan for Reconstruction. One major one is how will the South rejoin the Union? Do we try their leaders for treason? Because technically, if you were a Confederate military leader or Confederate soldier, nonetheless, you were trying to overthrow the government, and that is treason. And some are going to say that states should just rejoin quickly. Let's get this over with and let's move forward. While others are going to want to put stipulations on these southern states rejoining the Union before they meet, kind of put hoops up for them to jump through. The other major question is how will the southern economy be rebuilt? Remember, things like Sherman's March to Sea completely devastated the lands of the South. And this poses the question of what do slaves receive? Do we give them portions of land? Do farmers get to keep all of their land? Is there going to be enough to go around? We now have this large population of people that are entering the workforce, and is there going to be enough room in the workforce for them to enter? And the last question, not the last, but one of the last major questions is what rights do African Americans have? While we see the 13th Amendment ending slavery, there's nothing there's nothing describing what we do next. There is no description of what rights African Americans do or don't have, what it means to be a former slave, what it meant to be a freedman. So we have a lot of questions to answer in these Reconstruction plans. The first plan for Reconstruction, and I guess the most obvious, would be Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. Lincoln is going to be assassinated just a few days after Lee surrendered at Appomattox, so he does not get to implement this plan, but it was a widely known plan that Lincoln had on how the Confederate States would rejoin the Union. First, Lincoln wanted to grant pardons to all those that would take an oath against slavery. Now, of course, this excluded higher up military officials, but this would pertain to anybody else who would have been tried for treason. As long as they took an oath saying slavery is bad, we'll never do it again, they would receive a federal pardon against the treasonous activities that they had participated in. Also, he is going to say that states could rejoin the Union after 1/10, so 10%, of the population pledged loyalty to the Union. This is kind of a security measure. We don't want people back in the Union who don't want to be back in the Union. So he's saying if you pledge loyalty to the United States, then you can be a part of the United States again. And once you did that, your state would be allowed to receive federal funding to start rebuilding your state government, electing new officials, moving forward. The states under Lincoln's plan would be given the power to make laws regarding freed slaves, with the kind of asterisk that no civil rights would be broken. Now, this is going to be founded to be a terrible idea. You're giving the people who had formerly owned these people the right to determine their freedoms. That makes no sense, but whatever. That's their plan. Like I said, Lincoln's going to be assassinated before implementing this plan, and it's probably a good thing because the radical Republicans, that group that wanted to punish the South, that really blamed the South for the war, they don't think it's harsh enough. They want more punishments for the South. Uh, but when Lincoln is assassinated, Andrew Johnson becomes president. He is going to vow to honor Lincoln's legacy, and he's going to do his best to attempt to implement the plan that Lincoln had outlined. So, what does he implement? He puts into place the idea that pardons would be granted to those taking the loyalty oath, but this pardon would exclude all military leaders and all large landowners. Somebody was going to have to pay the price for the South seceding from the Union, and it was going to be the military leaders and the large landowners. He adds in that states have to abolish slavery. They have to accept the 13th Amendment before they would be readmitted to the Union. The states also have to repeal their secession before readmission. So basically, we're saying you got to take it back that you left the Union, that you wanted to break away from the United States, and then we'll let you back in. Under Johnson's plan, the worst part about Lincoln's plan is included that states get to decide on the treatment of African Americans. By 1870, all states are going to be readmitted to the Union. So it only takes a few short years to get everyone back to the Union. But in that process, it's still going to be a big, huge mess. The Radical Republican plan, this is going to be the group of Republicans in Congress that want to punish the South as heavily as humanly possible for the war. The Radical Republicans are going to win majority in Congress in 1866. This is huge because with a majority in Congress, they are able to write and pass laws that they want to see happen. All they have to do is get Johnson's approval because they have the majority in both the House and the Senate, and that is huge. The plan that they put into place first starts with the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This Civil Rights Act awards equality and property rights to all freed slaves, which means, theoretically, all freed slaves are supposed to have the same access to property, and once they obtain property, they're supposed to have the same legal rights to keep it, protected rights to that property as everybody else. Also, the Radical Republicans will pass the Military Reconstruction Act. What this did was divide the South into 5 military districts, and this created a government where former slaves could hold office. So, in these 5 military districts, there's going to be a federal military presence, making sure that laws are being carried out, that the directives from the federal government are being carried out in the South. So there's a heavy control over the South in the Military Reconstruction Act. Also, former slaves being allowed to hold office. There's nothing that would irritate a former Confederate soldier more than an African American being elected into office and creating laws regarding their life. But this was huge. And the Radical Republicans, this was a big gain for not only African Americans, but for the United States. Johnson is going to implement his plan while Congress was not in session, because if Congress had been in session, they could have passed laws or proposed laws to kind of go against his. Plus, he's kind of a big baby. He didn't want Congress to fight back against him. So he passes his plan while they're not in session, while they're not there to kind of combat him. Johnson's going to veto the proposed plan by the Radical Republicans, that Civil Rights Act, the Military Reconstruction Act. He's going to veto that. But because the radical Republicans had the majority in Congress, they're going to override that veto. And this is the first time in history that Congress had used the power to override the president's veto. So you can see how at odds the radical Republicans were with Johnson, who was a Republican. And Congress is going to try to and succeed in taking power away from the states that are going to abuse the power of making laws pertaining to the freedoms of freed slaves. They're going to do their best at this. We're going to see that it wasn't as successful as it probably could have been. But with the radical Republicans in power, there's going to be much more of a microscope on the South during Reconstruction. So, in the implementation, the carrying out of these plans, Johnson and Congress are going to just smash heads against each other. Uh, Johnson and Congress could not agree on what Reconstruction should look like. Johnson is going to want to go easier on the South. He's going to see the bigger picture that if we punish the South, it's not going to be good for the United States moving forward, that the South is going to harbor more resentment for the North. Hint, hint, wink, wink, he's right. But Congress is going to push to really punish the South for their actions and for the Civil War. And when Congress sees that Johnson is not on their train to punish the South, they're going to start to pass legislation to restrict the power of the president because they want to carry out their Reconstruction plan and they don't want him in the way. At this time, the president did not have the ability to appoint any Supreme Court justices because there weren't any open spaces. But what the president could do is appoint members into other government positions, such as his cabinet, such as the other federal judge positions. So there are other places where Johnson could put and nominate people into the government. And what Congress wants to do is limit that power of Johnson putting in people that weren't radical enough in this Reconstruction process. So Congress is going to pass the Tenure of Office Act. Now, this isn't 10 years, it's tenure. Just like teachers get tenure, faculty at different colleges get tenure. And what this means here is that the president could not remove anybody from office that had already been approved by the Senate without Senate approval. The Tenure of Office Act is a trap set by Congress for Johnson to attempt to impeach him. And it works. Johnson attempted to remove the last radical Republican from his cabinet. This was the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. Johnson didn't want to be surrounded by radical Republicans. He didn't agree with them. He wanted to get some more moderate people in there so that they could work with the South instead of against the South in Reconstruction. But when Johnson tries to remove this last cabinet member, remember cabinet members are nominated by the president, approved by the Senate, he violates the Tenure of Office Act. So the House is going to vote for impeachment proceedings. Just like the Constitution says, impeachment starts with a vote from the House. And because Congress is run by the radical Republicans, the impeachment proceedings are set in motion. The Senate is going to try Johnson for impeachment, but they don't want to risk losing their kind of stronghold, their foothold in what this could mean for the future. The Senate makes a really smart political move here. The Senate does not vote to remove Johnson from office. They fail to get all of the votes, but this works in their favor because Johnson, knowing that he gets to live another day as president, promises Congress he will carry out the Reconstruction Acts that they had proposed. Because remember, the executive branch has to enforce the law. So Johnson promises to enforce these laws. This whole impeachment proceeding gets Johnson to kind of be submissive to Congress. And it illustrates the extreme need the radical Republicans had to want to punish the South for the Civil War. Now, every time I've said punish, maybe you've thought of, and it always makes me think of Germany post World War I. That is a master for disaster plan right there. You don't want to punish after a war the loser because it only harbors feelings for resentment. Uh, Johnson is not going to want to be president anymore after the impeachment proceedings. He's like, man, this is messy. I do not want to be involved anymore. So he is going to leave office. Ulysses S. Grant is going to become the next president in 1869. Grant, you may remember, was a military leader for the Union during the war. He is going to be a two-term president. Grant, obviously, as a military hero, is going to support military intervention in the South to push to keep the South in line and carry out all the Reconstruction plans. Unfortunately for Grant, his presidency is going to be slapped with the Panic of 1873. I mean, we're coming out of a civil war. There really is no government safeguards in how to transition us to a successful economy after the war. We're really focused on repairing the nation first and foremost. And this isn't going to be just a U.S. depression, this is going to be a worldwide depression. But when we come together next time, we are going to look at the results and some of the issues surrounding Reconstruction. Don't forget to do your homework for tonight, and any questions, please let me know.